Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mrs. G's Storytime. We are reading Star of Light by Patricia Sanjan with permission of Moody Publishing Company, and we are reading Chapter 9, Supper at the Nurse's House. The rest of the day passed pleasantly. Hassa, pleased by Haman's admiration, took him around the town and up into the hillside to show him the spring of water welling up from the heart of the mountain. It never failed, and it kept the city supplied and the fields around it fresh and green. At midday they hung around the door of the hotel, and after a time a waiter flung them some broken rolls and meat that the guests had left on their plates, and the boys fell upon the food like hungry dogs. Then they curled themselves up against the trunk of the eucalyptus tree and slept in the shade. Evening came, and Haman stuck close to Hassa. They sat on some steps together with a few friends, watching the country people crowding into the square. Tomorrow was market day, and those who had come from a distance would spread out their sacks against the wall and sleep beside their wares. As darkness fell, the shopkeepers lit their lamps again, and the other little boys sauntered up to their various jobs and collected on the steps. "Come," said Hassa, who seemed to be the sort of leader among them. "She will soon open her door now." He beckoned Haman to follow him, but Haman hesitated. He felt torn in two. Hunger and his great longing to see whether all was well with the little sister urged him on, but caution held him back. What if he should be forced to speak while Kinza was there? She would certainly recognize his voice and run to him, and then everyone would be suspicious. "Come on," asked Hassan impatiently, looking back. Haman shook his head. "I'm not coming," he replied. He sat down again on the steps with his head in his hands, staring gloomily into the market. Then he got up suddenly, for he had an idea. He would not go in, but he would creep to the door of the house, as he had done the night before, and peep through the crack. Perhaps he could catch a glimpse of Kinza. Like some guilty little thief, he darted into the quiet back street and sneaked along the wall toward the open door. He peered around very cautiously, but there was no sign or sound of her, only the murmuring of voices, and then the shrill noise of a little boy singing. Kinza was apparently nowhere about. He was standing in a very dangerous position. He shuffled into the rubbish heap and began to cry quietly, because his friends and his little sisters were all inside the house, where there was shelter and light and food, and he was left outside. And then something happened. The door opened a little further, and the nurse stepped out into the street to see if any more boys were coming before she started the lesson. She appeared silently, and Haman did not see her at first. But she heard a wretched sniffling sound close by and looked around, and she spotted him on the rubbish heap. Haman jumped up, frightened, but she stood between him and freedom, and he could not escape. So he rubbed away his tears and crouched, staring up at her. He had never seen anyone like her before. "Why don't you come in?" she asked. Attracted by a sense of welcome, he got up and walked slowly towards her. She waited quite still, afraid of startling him, and then, when she was close to her, she held out her hand. He took it and stepped trustfully through the doorway with her. They entered the lighted room together, and Haman took a good look around. It was a long, whitewashed room with a rush mat on the floor and mattresses against the wall. At one end, the boys sat cross-legged in a semicircle. On the opposite was a door with the picture of the saint smiling down on him, just as he had smiled down on Kinza. "Come," said the nurse, "sit down with the others. I'm going to show you something." Hassa grinned at him delightfully, and Haman wormed his way into the semicircle and sat beside him. The boys looked younger here somehow, not like men of the world any more. The nurse sat down on the mattress in front of them and showed them a little book. It was quite unlike the Koran, for it was only the book Haman had ever seen inside. None of the boys could read at all, anyway. The nurse explained how God lived in a place like a bright golden city, heaven, where there were only good things and happiness. "I'd like to go there," thought Haman. "It would be even better than our village. No fear, no quarreling, no blindness." But while he was thinking about this wonderful place, the nurse told them that because of the bad things people do wrong, God cannot let them into the city. The gate is shut to wrongdoers. Haman had never worried about doing wrong before. In fact, he had never even thought about what wrong was. Of course he stole if he got the chance, and naturally he told lies if they would save him from a beating. Why shouldn't he? Then the nurse went on to tell them a strange story. Apparently God's Son, whose name was Jesus, had left this wonderful city and came down to the world to live with people he loved. At the end, he lived on a cross. He died on a cross as a punishment for all the wrong things everyone had ever done. He had done nothing wrong himself and didn't deserve to die, but because he loved people so much, he wanted them to be able to go and live in his home, heaven, with him. He had died in place of everyone else, even bad, lying, thieving little boys like Haman and the rest of the gang. All they had to do was say that they were sorry and ask Jesus to forgive them. Then the nurse stopped talking and brought in 2 great bowls of steaming rice and handed out about hunks of bread. The children divided up into 2 groups and huddled around their supper, scooping up the food at an amazing pace, then polishing the bowls with their dirty little fingers. No one spoke much until the last lick and crumb had vanished, because they were racing against each other to get the most. When every bit was gone, they sat back on their heels and questioned the nurse about the little girl whom they had found in the passageway the night before. "She is still with me," she said, smiling a little. "She is at the moment asleep in bed." Haman looked at her hard. She did not seem to be annoyed at Kinza still being with her. "I took her all around town with me today and went out on the nurse, and nobody has seen her before and knows who her parents are. She is a little blind girl, so I suppose that no one wants her." "But what will you do with her?" asked the boys all together. "Well, I shall keep her for a moment, and nothing else can be done." This time she laughed outright, and Haman nearly laughed too, with joy and relief. He had a wild, reckless longing to see his little sister asleep in bed. He was no longer afraid. He waited until the little boys had bowed and shaken hands with their hostess and skipped off into the dark. Then she turned and found him lingering in the passage. His heart was beating violently, but he spoke steadily and boldly. "I come from a village," he said, "and in my village there are 2 or 3 blind baby girls whose parents come into the market. Let me see her. Perhaps I can tell you who her mother is." The nurse looked down at him, surprised. She had certainly never seen this little boy before, and he might be speaking the truth. She had watched him since he had entered her house and noticed his thin, tired face and his bruised feet, also the ravenous way he had fallen on his food. She guessed he had traveled a long way and was glad to shelter him, so she led him to the room upstairs where Kinza lay on a mattress fast asleep. She looked different because she had had a bath and had come out quite another color. Also, her hair had been washed and cut, and instead of the tangles she had soft, dark curls falling over her forehead. Her old dress had been changed for a little white nightgown, spotlessly clean. Haman gazed at her, fascinated for a while, and then looked around the room. It was brightly lit and furnished simply, but there were pretty covers on the mattresses, books on the shelves, and pictures on the walls. He longed to stay with her, but knew it was not possible. "I do not know her," he said gravely. "She is not one of the children from our village." He followed the nurse downstairs in silence, and she came to the door and let him out. He stepped into the street, looked up into her face, and took hold of the hand that had been so kind to Kinza. "You are good," he said simply, "and your food is good. Your teaching is good. Your heart is good. May God have mercy on your ancestors." And then he had bounded away down the street and disappeared into the darkness. Tomorrow is chapter 10. Haman learns a lesson for life. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.